Our second segment for today is going to address the intersections of race, gender, and LGBTQIA identity. And our panelists are the Reverend Dr. Tori Butler of Good Hope Union United Methodist Church in Silver Spring, Maryland, the Reverend Dr. Pamela Lightsey, who is Dean of the Faculty and Vice President of Student Affairs at Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago, and the Reverend Dr. Vance P. Ross, who is pastor of Central United Methodist Church in Atlanta, and he is also co-leader of the Black Pastors Institute. Welcome, my brother and my sisters.
Very good to be with you. Thank you.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Tori, I'm going to start with you. You reflect in the book, and I love this, about living with the harmful intersection of racism and sexism. And you talked about how Black women are often stereotyped and painted as assertive, angry, and uncompromising. And I want to talk to you about, I want you to tell us about some of your experiences, how that kind of weight has impacted you, and how you have embraced what you talk about as grieving that stereotype, but also self-love and spiritual practices, because I think it's important for African-American pastors and leaders to be able to turn those stereotypes around and find our joy and our purpose. So say a bit more about that, please.
Sure. My chapter was called I'm Black, I'm Young, I'm a Woman, and I'm Grieved. And part of the reason why I started with this grief process is there was such a long period in my ministry where I felt like my voice was silenced. And I felt like the pain of being a young Black and gifted woman, clergy woman, it didn't matter. It didn't matter that I had the same type of training or acumen as some of my white counterparts. It didn't matter how gifted or anointed I was. There was just a stained glass brick ceiling for me. And I talk a little bit about that in the chapter because I call it stained glass, you know, in terms of just the church. And it kind of was symbolized by a stained glass cross that I have on my desk that was given as a seminary gift. And every time I look at the stained glass cross, it wasn't always a symbol of hope, because every time we kind of see the cross, it's supposed to remind us of resurrection and the power of the transformative power of God. But when I looked at the stained glass cross, it showed me, it was a reminder of the limitations at times. It was a reminder that to watch myself. And what I mean by that is, as a Black woman, your worth is often predicated by how much you can produce. So if I am producing and overproducing, and if I've gotten to the place of burnout, it really doesn't matter as long as I am doing more than what is required of me to do. And so I'm talking about learning how to holler, because for me, I got tired of putting on this trope of the strong Black woman. I got tired of wearing, I'm going to say this, I got tired of carrying bricks around with me. And at some point, I had to learn, well, what does the Bible have to say to me about my pain and the grief that I'm carrying? Where can I go? And so I began to look at Jephthah's daughter in Judges chapter 11. And what we find in this chapter, it is Jephthah, this kind of warrior, makes this promise to God, who says, like, God, if you give me victory, God, if you allow me to succeed in my journey, anything that comes out of my house, I will offer as a burnt offering. And so what comes out of the house is this young girl who like many young women would do if their father had been away on a business trip. She runs out the door and greets her dad. And then the reality hits that her life is not worth anything. And so what she does is says, you know what, you do what you got to do. But then she plans her own funeral service. She kind of takes back her power and says, look, give me some time to go and hang out with my girlfriends in the hills for 2 months, and we're just going to hang out. But what they begin to do there is they begin to cry out to the Lord. They begin to lament. And lament in this sense is crying out to God with the expectation that something will happen. But in this story, there wasn't a change that happened. The only thing that I can name is that there was an internal change that happened. And so lament became not just individual, it became communal. It became not just my voice crying out. It became the women around me crying out alongside of me. And so when I began to cry out, I found this new language, and it's called the holler, and it's by Elaine Brown, who talks about this cry against racialized and genderized violence. And so when I learned how to holler, when I learned how to lament, when I learned how to name my pain and not be ashamed of it, that's when I became free. And then begin to invite other women, other Black women into that same space to find a space to be truthful. Oftentimes people are so afraid of being truthful because of the cost.
Right.
You know, I write a little bit about this. Like, there was a time where I was just afraid of, if I were to really tell the truth of the pain that I was in, that it would cost me a good appointment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there comes a point in your life where you have to choose my sanity, my walk with Christ, and this idea that I'm going to be free anyway. I don't care where they put me. I don't care where I'm going. I don't care where I'm serving. The Spirit of the Lord is still so prevalent in my life that I have no choice but to be free. And if you're going to be in relationship with me, it's my job to push you into your place of freedom and let you know that you can holler too. Mm-hmm. You can cry out against racialized and genderized violence and say that it is not okay.
Yeah, that is so powerful. Reminds me, in the last couple of years, we had to have conversations with members of a board of ordained ministry in one of the conferences, where one of the chairpersons told a Black woman, a candidate, that if you cannot think and act like a white man, mm-hmm. you're not going to make it in this church. Told that to her in the meeting. And she was another young, energetic Black woman. And we had to work that through and talk that through. And that's some of the institutional racism that each of you talk about in the book. And Tori, you especially were very poignant in this point about what that weight does to the psyche. And what it's saying is, if you don't act like I think you ought to act, if you don't act like what the white church thinks you ought to act like, not what Jesus thinks, but the white church, you're not going to make it. And that is a weight. That is holler worthy, as you would say. That is holler worthy. So I appreciated you sharing that. Pamela, you walk with this similarly. Tori's younger than you and I, but you have walked with this, and you have also been a strong advocate for queer women as well. So I wanted to ask you, what has been the impact, do you think, as someone who has shepherded other clergy women, of racial bias and stereotyping? And how does that impact the efficacy of ministry, number one, and the Methodist Church, number two? So why is the church having such a hard time embracing women and LGBTQ folks? And what is that costing us as a church?
So, Garlinda, it's good to see you today and to be here with my colleagues. And let me begin by saying discrimination has impacts the Black life at the point of conception. If we're thinking about health care, and we're having a lot of conversations during this time of COVID about health care, particularly for Black people and especially for Black women. So we don't get away from discrimination. We live with it prior to birth, and we live with it all through our lives. Discrimination is foundational to America. It is also foundational to the United Methodist Church. It is historical to both our nation. I mean, I'm now still trying to work through what took place on the 6th of January, 2021, the insurrection. The insurrection is part of the history. Will go down in the annals of American history. It is historical. And it shows us that discrimination in this historical context leads to torture, to trauma, to insurrection, to the deceit that comes after insurrection, and to death. Now, I'm not simply speaking about the nation. I'm also speaking about our denomination. We have had insurrection in our denomination to the point where we are now on the cusp of schism. Why? Because of discrimination. Why? Because of the distraction of discrimination. I'm really into Toni Morrison now, where she talks about the function of discrimination,
Yes.
the function of racism being distraction. But the ways that racism impacts our lives, particularly the LGBTQ lives, is that it has caused, particularly in our church to function as if implementing laws against LGBTQ persons, and prior to that, women, and prior to that, Black people. The church has thought, Christian folk have thought, that if they could somehow legislate, if they could somehow put into place laws that controlled our lives, that somehow that would make the institution better. And what we have found is that it has killed us. And along the way to destruction, it has tortured us. It has cost us in so many ways. It has harmed our ministry, and it has harmed our very souls. LGBTQ discrimination is equally racist and equally sexist. And let us not try to separate sexism and racism from homophobia and transphobia. They are equally as destructive and equally as discriminatory, equally impacting our ministry. And unfortunately, some of my colleagues thought that they could have one without the other. Well, when you get in bed with discrimination on any level, you are harming your ministry. You are harming your very soul in the name of Jesus Christ. And let us not forget the pictures that we've seen, that we saw on Wednesday. People were at Capitol Hill hugging the flag and hugging their Bibles at the same time.
My God.
Well,
My God.
I hope I've answered your question thoroughly. And Garlinda, I've been writing about this for decades now. The Bible, I take the text. I mean, the text is a guide for me. When the Bible says cry loud and spare not, I've tried to do that through my scholarly writing. You will see in my writing where I have been warning the church about getting into bed with discrimination, and then saying to my colleagues, this is not, you think you're only hurting me, but you are hurting the church. And the church is a strange place. They thought, some thought that in striving for laws against LGBTQ persons, that was it. As if Black people are not LGBTQ, are not in that community. That it's racism is all an entanglement. And that's why I have sought to in my writings, show the ugliness of it. And I've also conversely spoke about racism in the LGBTQ community. I've not held my tongue here.
No, you have.
In my writing, I try not to hold my tongue here. There is a pig
Mm-hmm.
There is a hog in the spring, and the church wants a cool drink of water, and you can't get it
Mm-hmm.
You said that.
until you take care of the hog in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
You said that.
You can't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
See, the folk from up north won't know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. That hog in the spring.
Money out the water.
Mm.
Can't get it. You can't get that cool, clean drink of water. No.
Mm.
Yep. Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Vance, I'm on.
Yeah.
Pamela's got me on fire now. So, you are a well-respected African American male heterosexual pastor, and whose voice is strong and people listen to you. I want to ask you, how do we help our Black clergy men to preach a gospel and to embrace a gospel that is joining with our sisters and joining with our LGBTQ family, so that we are standing against racism and discrimination in all forms? You talk about in your chapter, I loved your chapter where you talked about how we have got to preach the gospel and have a theological conversation instead of people cherry picking the Bible around racism and other forms of discrimination. What is it that you put forth as your theological understanding for us doing that, for staring down racism?
Well, I think one of the things you do to get through that is read this book.
Yeah.
Part of that is to begin to walk in somebody else's shoes. Act like you paying attention to what happens to someone else. It's not you.
Mm-hmm.
And what would it be if it happened to you?
Mm-hmm.
It's the third thing. Stop acting like Jesus could possibly be a citizen of Rome who was blonde and blue-eyed. Stop behaving as if whiteness and those racialized as white and their systems
Mm-hmm.
are indeed and in fact the gospel. Those are not the same things. And we need to stop doing that. Let's be sure we understand that Coates, Ta-Nehisi Coates says race is the child of racism, not the father, not the parent.
Yeah.
Let's act like we understand that this is something created by somebody else to abuse other people. And once you understand that for you, now let's start paying attention to this Jesus who pays attention to that kind of stuff. Let's not ignore, and everybody not happy about this, but let's not ignore that Jesus is corrected in my limited understanding of biblical text. But I think I've got some. He's corrected by twice. Two women. His mama, boy, get this wine for these people. Two, a sister who says, my baby's in trouble. A sister, you can dress it any way you want to. He calls her a female dog. Now you do the translation.
Mm-hmm.
And she says she ain't going nowhere. And Mac Charles Jones, or the late Mac Charles Jones, had a great interpretation of this out of his hermeneutic. He said this woman got on her knees and said to him, you're going to have to prove to me that you're not who you claim you are. If you are who you claim you are, I'm not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Next thing, let's most of us stop acting like we didn't learn most of our theology, most of this biblical thing from women. Let's not. Now, I'm one who I'm reared by two women, my mother and my grandmother. That's where I come from. My mother really gave me spirit. My grandmother helped me understand institutions and social stuff. I didn't have a man around, so that you could argue that there are places and spaces where I may be macho deficient. Having said that, most of us had our lessons in Sunday school, vacation Bible school by women. We heard proclamations from pastors that often did not intersect with what these sisters were showing and teaching. So I think we've got to be very much attentive to those things. We have to, or I have to, or everybody didn't have to use my language, But at some point, we have to decide where is it that we find our identities, and who makes our identities for us. Years and years ago, I read one of my heroes said that he was United Methodist who happened to be Black. I love him, but I had to say to him some 6-7 years ago, the Lord gave me something else. No, I'm not a United Methodist who happens to be Black. I'm a Black man who happens to be United Methodist. By virtue of free will, I can leave this anytime. So I'm a United Methodist Black man. I'm not a Black United Methodist man. God gave me the gift of being Black.
All right.
And God gave me the opportunity to choose whether or not I'm going to be United Methodist. I made a conscious choice based on what I saw from women, particularly in the Women's Society for Christian Service, NAACP, marching for voting rights in the small town of Bluefield, West Virginia. That's what I saw. That's what I was surrounded by. Preachers were out front leading for sure. But most of the soldiers who were also strategists, tacticians, were women. Now, it seems to me that if we just pay a little bit of attention to history, United Methodist history, that there's nothing written to my knowledge pointing to sexuality till 72.
That's true.
Now, if that's so, and I believe it is,
it's true.
How did we get here? It looks like I'm running to Lightsey now. I'm out of my chapter. I'm running to Lightsey now. It looks to me like we had to find somebody to put down, talk about. We can't be anybody until we're stepping on somebody. Now that's your point of insurrection right there, because it's always violent.
Yeah,
always violent.
Always trying to kill somebody.
Right.
It's not the protest. It's not the protest. It's not the peaceful protest. It's the violence.
From Lightsey. Like, let me throw Lightsey in here now. She talked, and she killed me with this. It's hubris. It is basic, fundamental arrogance that finds itself psychologically in everybody somewhere. And if you're not paying attention to it, it becomes sociological, anthropological, theological, and justifies madness.
Yes.
Murder.
Sets itself up against God and against fellow human beings. We are better than it all. We are better than God. We know better than human beings. Hubris.
Yeah.
And this hubris will find itself because you've been dealing with it. You've been raised by sisters. They blessed you. You knew the gay folk in the community. You knew who they were. And in your community, but because you've been this Methodist thing, in this United Methodist, you start buying what they selling because you say, I got to step on somebody too. I'm being stepped on. I got to put my feet on somebody somewhere. And the way you come out of that is you got to spend some time. Barbara Holmes is killing me. Spend some time in some contemplative moments that are uniquely Black. You start paying attention to the drum beat.
Yep.
Let that thing start speaking to you. You get in a spot somewhere and you listen to Roberta Flack or Anita Baker or Luther. Let one of them people speak to your heart.
Yep.
And you start, come on, y'all. Y'all know we've been listening to Luther for years. Now you're going to throw Luther out because of sex.
Okay.
We've been reading Langston Hughes for years. Are we going to throw in? Are we really going to do that?
Yep. Yep.
My limited understanding of literature, the finest essay written in the 20th century, the fire next time. Are we really?
James Baldwin.
Better call that.
Really
James Baldwin.
Baldwin has given us?
Absolutely.
And don't get me started on Audre Lorde.
Audre Lorde. Yeah.
Audre.
Audre Lorde?
Yeah.
Are we really? And Lord, my limited understanding, Lord really gets that in.
It comes to us through James Baldwin.
Yes.
It's all from James Baldwin.
Yes.
Come on.
It's absolutely true. And I always have that vision of Pentecost where people from every corner and nation are praising God together. And there is no footnote that says these folks weren't invited. If they were same gender loving, they couldn't be there. If they were black or brown or white, they couldn't be there. We put those footnotes in as a church, and it feels as if, I think this for me as a layperson, this for me is the challenge: is can we be Christian without having somebody to marginalize and hate?
Mm.
Yeah. Well, see,
We can, we must be, Garlinda, but it will take us to be, it will take humility. We
Yeah.
don't, let's turn to our politics. Right now, we've had a man for 4 years in the White House who takes no responsibility for anything.
Mhm.
The height of hubris.
Mm-hmm.
The height of hubris. And those who follow him are spinning. They are lighting the American public. They are saying this didn't happen. They are saying, well, we need to move on from this. The nation needs to heal from this. They want to take no responsibility for the damage that they've done. Can we heal from it? Can we do that? Yes, but it will take humility, and it will take people coming and saying, you know what? I was wrong.
Yes.
I was wrong.
Yeah.
absolutely. I got
Can
to
we
share this.
pass back to, hold on, can we pass back to Dr. Ross real quick? Because he kind of hits that in his chapter of just being able to bring about that within the structure of United Methodism. And I
Yeah.
think it'd be really helpful just to hear a little bit from you concerning the structural piece, because I think that was extremely powerful. Dr. Ross kind of ends the book
Yes, it does.
about the structural racism that we're all facing, and the necessity to name it. Mm-hmm. And so, Dr. Ross, if you could just talk a little bit to us just about this connection that Dr. Lightsey just kind of named for us in the political realm, and how you kind of bridge between the political realm and what's going on in Methodism today, and even in the past.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. I need to say, before I get there, that your discussion of the Harlem becomes so crucial. I had no idea when I got to the seminary and learned, because I came from a church that was sedate, quiet. We did high church better than anybody. Didn't nobody do high church better than we did. And I got in a place where people were hollering. I said, "Oh, this ain't Methodist." And I'm in there, and it's feeling good. I'm grooving with it, and I'm getting a sense. Oh yeah, this is Black. This is African. The sense that you're feeling good because this is in your DNA. This expression is, and coming out as a United Methodist Black man who refused to be a Black United Methodist man. Over the years, I have had people attempt to make me quench my holler.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Watch me.
You're too loud.
They weren't white folk.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they weren't white folk.
Say that.
So I think today the question really is, and I think the book kind of pushes us in this direction: how do we holler when there's no altar?
My Lord.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
My Lord.
Because I think this book is pushing us to ask the question of how do we name the powers that are around us when we don't have an altar to cry out to? Because typically for us as Black folk, when things get rough, we go to church and we kneel at the altar to pray, and we're asking the preacher to intercede for us, and we're asking the saints or the old church mothers to come and lay hands on us as we weep and wail at the altar. So what does it mean for us in this season as we're talking about racism and sexism and all these other isms and political division? How do we begin to holler? How do we begin to lament when there's no altar?
But that's an iconoclastic symbol of religion that we can very well do without as Black people.
Okay.
We can very well do without it as Black people. If we make the signs and the symbols of religion or religiosity our gods, then we are baptizing a kind of idolatry that we want nothing, that we never wanted anything to do with. We've understood always as a people that we could find God in any number of things.
Yeah.
In the sky. Don't you lift your heads up to the and your eyes up to the sky. We see Black people doing it in church all the time. You know, you're talking to the wind even, because you understand that God moves, and God is in the many places within transcendent and immanent. So we cannot place place the sacredness of the divine in a thing. You know, in
and
a
the
thing.
system, and the system is a thing, and
Yeah,
the system
There we
is
go.
Yes.
Come on, break it in.
a system is perfectly designed for the results it gets,
Right.
and the results we get for United Methodist Black folk are painful at best, annihilating at worst.
Yes.
We've got people, preachers and lay, killing themselves, figuratively and literally.
Yes.
We've got folks, both Butler and Dr. Caldwell Gross talk about the muting of voices.
Yes. Yes.
And the stammer, and it's designed to and for that. Never forget, in 39 they created 6 jurisdictions,
Yes.
5 geographic, 1 not. In 68 they eliminated the one that was not, the one that gave us at least some, we thought, power, some sense of who we ordained, some sense of how we move and where we move. Nobody even talked about, even now, eliminating the other 5.
Right.
That are by nature and by origin and by purpose racist.
Yes. And created to divide the church.
That's right.
Theologically.
That's right. So that we could maintain a way of life for those racialized as white.
Yes.
And we're not talking about any people. We're talking about the system and the leadership that keeps pushing it now.
Especially the leadership, because it is the leadership that teaches in our churches on Sunday mornings, in our Sunday schools, lest we be reminded of a Jeff Sessions.
Yes.
Lest we be reminded that United Methodists make up they're in the top tier of politicians in Congress.
Yes.
So,
and that's always fine, and that's okay. But let a Stacey Abrams, who is the daughter of 2.
Now you preaching now.
My God.
Who comes to transform systems? She's demonized by many of our white brothers and sisters and family in our church.
Because she is fighting against the continuation of Jim Crow laws.
Yes.
We thought Jim Crow was over, but Jim Crow laws continue, and they continue supported through our denomination, through the works of many of the leaders in our denomination.
Yes.
So we need to talk about this and talk about how our polity, our church polity, has hurt us in terms of who we are as a people and who we are as Christians, and to be clear about how that has been done over the last 2-3 decades through the hate legislation against LGBTQ persons.
Well, since 72. Yeah. You all, this has been rich. We're at our time. I want to thank you all. I want to thank Dr. Tori Butler, Dr. Pamela Lightsey, and Dr. Vance Ross for just an energizing conversation. And thank you who have joined us. For our next and final conversation, we will be talking about ministry and racism. Thank you very much, panel. You are wonderful. Thank you so much.